He's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with over 26 years of experience. Together, we're the Brief Brothers. We love talking about creative briefs, briefing, and advertising. We're back for another episode, Henry, and today we're joined by someone I've known about for a long time, but I've never met. His name is Gary Goldsmith. He's the department chair of creative direction at the ArtCenter in Pasadena. Let's join the conversation. Here we go. All right, Henry, we're back with another episode, and it's wonderful because I have known about Gary Goldsmith for a long time, but we've never met. I know him by reputation. He is the department chair of creative direction at the one and only ArtCenter, the College of Design in Pasadena, and he's joining us today on the Brief Brothers. Gary, thank you so much for being our guest.
My pleasure. It's good to be with you guys.
So as I was saying, one of the topics that Henry and I love to come back to over and over again, because when we talk about the creative brief, it is about, teaching and how do we do this document better, and what can we do to be better thinkers. So we love to talk about education, about training for our industry and advertising. We bemoan the fact that agencies no longer do the training the way they used to in the 70s and the 80s, but we have amazing institutions like ArtCenter College of Design in Pasadena to pick up and keep the tradition going. And as a department chair, you're one of the thought leaders and one of the teachers. So, it's hard to know exactly where to start, but let me ask you this question, because Henry and I talk about this a lot too. Do you get a sense that the students who come through ArtCenter are comfortable selling widgets? Or are they obsessed with trying to change the world?
Both. ArtCenter attracts a type of student that is generally knows what they're getting into. They know what they're signing up for. They know it's a serious place. They know they're going to be worked hard. They know they're going to have careers when they leave. And so I don't think too many of our students come in with false illusions of what it's about. And yes, and I tell them all the time, when you get good at this, you can use what you're learning to change the world. You can make big change with the stuff you do, because communication is a key part of that, as we all know. And so once you learn the skills, whether you're selling an Apple computer or Nike shoes or whatever, a soft drink or a cause that's very important to you, the same skills and strategic thinking apply.
But are they comfortable, and would they accept an assignment to sell Pop-Tarts in their first job?
Yeah, they would. They would. After 3.5, 4 years with us, they would.
Okay.
Because they've worked on a wide range of stuff. And now where I will say is they're not going to work on anything that they believe is immoral in some way or bad for society in some way. And obviously we all draw the line in different places on that. And I tell them that's absolutely fine, because when I was at DDB early in my career, I refused to work on cigarettes. And I didn't care whether that made me popular or not. I wasn't going to do it. My dad died of lung cancer. I was very aware of the harm of cigarettes, and I'm not working on it. And if that's a deal breaker, okay, fine, but I'm not going to work on it. So I make it very clear to them that, there are times when you can draw a line in the sand and say, for my own reasons, and I'm happy to articulate them, I'm not going to work on that. I'm not comfortable working on that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Specific categories that people don't want to work in, but I think what we're feeling and we're sensing, and and obviously these are vastly different institutions, but when I've taught and I give my spiel about, like, you're about to become a cog in the wheel of capitalism, like some of them haven't fully thought that through yet, and I could see kind of like the scales falling off their eyes. I too have refused work in the past. I worked on a client that was launching a a channel of programming to run in the United States from Cuba, which is a regime that my parents escaped from. And so said, I don't want to, number one, I think it's a horrible business decision because nobody's going to watch this thing. And I was right. And number two, you're dealing with a regime that's got a lot of blood on its hands and I don't want to. And so the owner of the agency at the time had to hire a freelancer to work on this project. But I just feel that some kids coming out of schools these days, are a little bit, you said that your students, and I got to praise you if that's true, that they're coming out with their eyes open, and hopefully that's more kids will come out with their eyes open from these institutions.
Yeah, I think they absolutely are. By the time they get midway through the program, I think they kind of understand that. And they also understand that the better you become, the more sought after you are, the more you will have flexibility in terms of what you work on. And so, I use that as an incentive and say, hey, you want to be able to call your own shots and maybe have your own agency or have your own company or be the person in a company that gets to pick and choose, then you've got to get really good. You've got to prove yourself on all kinds of things. And when you first start out, you can't sit there and cherry pick only the precious few things you want to work on. Yes, if there's something that really offends you, like you've just described or what I've described, that's different. But generally, it's our job to sell things and to try to find a way to sell them in a way that's positive and is going to make a positive impact.
Another kind of, I just wanted to tag on, and tangentially related to that topic, was about when you talked about not being able to choose the brands you work for, especially when you're new in the business, is something that I like to do. And I've talked to Howard a lot about this, is when I workshop and when I teach, I like to work with brands that are advertisers, but they're not the sexy advertisers, right? Like, the last thing that I did at the Miami Ad School, the brief that I gave the students was for Advanced Auto Parts, which is like an auto parts chain, kind of like a I don't know. Yeah. Like a more downscale version of Pep Boys. And it was interesting because, I think a lot of these kids think about the Nikes and the Apples of the world, but there's far more, just everyday advertisers that are out there, frankly, putting mediocre work out into the world, and that they need the help, right? They need better talent and they need better people working on the accounts. So is that something like the assignments that your students get? Is there any rhyme or reason to like the kind of brands or clients that they might be working on?
Yeah, I mean, each class throughout the curriculum kind of builds on itself, so they're all different. But one of the universal things is they don't work on something like a Nike or an Apple because that's been done. That those brands have kind of reached their fruition, so to speak, and found their voice. What we try to do is give them brands to work on that might be a good product, but does not have a voice yet. And nobody's turned it into a Nike or an Apple yet. And I tell them all the time, I'm like, look, you think Nike's so glamorous. It's a shoe. It's a sneaker. Okay. In the abject sense, a long time ago, before anybody knew Nike was Nike, it's a tennis shoe. And yet they created more emotion around that than people have created around very emotional topics. So it's all how you can look at that brand and find a way to make it have relevance to people and relevance in their lives, that you're laddering it up from being just what it is. So we'll give them something like AAA. I
always tell the students it's more rewarding when you take a brand that's in Nowheresville and you elevate it, right? I was fortunate enough to see a document and have access to a document from when Wieden and Kennedy pitched Old Spice in 2006. I mean, that was a nowhere brand, you know, and today it's a brand that is seen as like a leading advertiser. It's a brand that everybody looks at the advertising and says, wow, I wish I had done that, or that's incredible. But that was something that was available for anybody, you know, any agency that had worked on it along the way to elevate it. It just took the geniuses at Wyden and Kennedy to be able to do that. So I'm a big fan of that approach.
Does anybody actually wear Old Spice? It's kind of an old man's. I mean, I'm an old man,
well,
so I
but
can say
they
it.
have a whole lot. See, that's part of it, was repositioning it. So now they have body wash, they have
Yeah.
deodorant, they have, you know, I have actually the little bottle of aftershave, and I use it when I shave over here on the sides. I do use, I like the scent of the classic Old Spice.
Yeah, the classic one. Yeah, yeah.
But I'm an old
Yeah,
soul
I mean,
that way.
you know, I mean, it's like right guard. I mean, who wears? I guess there are a lot of people who still wear right guard, but it just seemed like. I mean, it's like a great campaign. It's an amazing campaign, but does anyone actually use the product? I guess so, because otherwise they wouldn't be spending the money
It
on
wouldn't
it.
exist. Yeah, it wouldn't still exist.
Yeah, and speaking of money, you know, anyone who's ever applied or thought about applying to ArtCenter knows that it's not a cheap school. It's not like going to Glendale College, right? I used to teach at Glendale College. So it's serious money. So you if you're going to choose this as your profession, you got to put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah, you're right. And, you know, I went to ArtCenter a long, long time ago after I finished at UT, because at UT I was majoring in architecture and journalism. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I kept changing my interests. Yeah, and so I went to ArtCenter, and back then, before moving to New York. So I'm kind of familiar with the ArtCenter drill, but it is expensive. We do give scholarships, and so we try to help people as much as we possibly can. But I'm very mindful of that. And you know, when we evaluate our program, I mean, the main thing we evaluated on is, are we preparing these people to have good careers? Which does not mean just getting a job out of school. Yes, getting a job out of school is the first step, but are we preparing them to move in their careers? And have I prepared somebody to be a creative director 5 years from now or 7 years from now? Have I prepared them to start a business 10, 12 years from now? And so we take that very seriously. And, you know, that's one of the joys actually of going to graduation, when you get to meet the parents and look them in the eye and their sons or daughters have jobs. You feel like, okay, you know, promise fulfilled. You know, they're putting their money and their time with us, and we have to give them back something that counts for something.
You mentioned the business side, and I'm curious because I've always had this, and I promise I'll let you talk in a second, Howard.
No, it's all right. I want to hear from Gary.
But I have this question because I've always seen that there's a fork in the road where a good creative, when they approach that creative director position, right? In a lot of cases, you know, they start out as an art director or a copywriter, and the first few years of the career, just honing that craft that they have, either with copy or with art direction. And then over time, the titles accumulate, and you end up as an associate creative director, and then but nobody's ever taught you, like, oh, how to manage people, how to manage budgets, how to manage timelines. You know, the director part is more important at that point than the creative part, right? Like, you're not just like a super art director. You have to be a manager. And I'm afraid that a lot of kids that come into the industry, and I'm not saying that's the case with your graduates, but there's just no training programs anymore at the agencies to, like, really, you just have to kind of learn by observation, and some people do, and they're good. But I look back at, like, the legendary creative directors, like a Bill Bernbach, that he was a businessman. I mean,
Right.
he was incredibly creative, but he was a businessman. He knew how to operate his agency. He knew how to lead people. He knew about the clients' businesses and their accounts. I don't know that everybody, all the young kids in our industry these days, have that necessarily.
No, I think you're right. I mean, we put a lot of emphasis in that, in terms of strategy, in terms of being able to articulate your ideas and why they're good. Because as we make very clear, a great idea is nothing until it's been sold. And unless you can analytically think why this idea is strategically right for that client, walking in a room and saying, we think this is really good because it's really funny, that doesn't count for anything. That doesn't take you where you need to be. So we spend a lot of time talking about how to position those things. And we spend a lot of time working with people on how to make other people's work better. Because if they're going to be a creative director, that's one of the things that's going to be a key part of their job. And so, I tell them first term, I say, I'm going to tell you two things now that are very contradictory. One, every day when you go into class, I want you to have a burning desire to have the best work up on the wall, better than anybody else's work on that wall. And two, here's the thing that you may think is contradictory, but it's not. I want you to sit there after the critique when the teacher's asking if anybody has anything to say, and I want you to take it upon yourself to try to make everybody else's work better. Okay, that's what you have to do. Because if you can make other people's work better, then you're going to A, make your own work better, and B, you're going to be a better creative director someday. So we do try to broaden their skills, as you're talking about, and prepare them as much as we can for the business world. But as you said, I mean, there's certain things they'll only learn when they walk in that door and meet the hard reality. But we try to prepare them as much as we can.
I recall someone, it might have been one of our guests on a previous episode, who said that Bill Bernbach used to carry around a little card in his pocket, and he would pull it out every now and then just as kind of a reminder. Maybe this was Giles Edwards from last week. I forget if it was him or not. But he said, was it Giles?
I think it was.
Yeah, he pulled his card out every now and then, and the card said, they could be right. Meaning the client, or maybe a colleague, it just, they could be right. And I may not have the exact quote. Did I get that right, Henry? Was it something like that?
They might be right, I think
they might be right. And he would pull this out every now and then just to kind of shake his head and get back into reality and not get so lost in his own beliefs and his, my ideas are great. They might be right. And I think that really gets to what you're saying, that it sounds contradictory, but it's not. And I want to get back to something you said, that the title of your department has changed. You're the chair front. What was it before? It was called creative direction.
It was called advertising.
Advertising, right? So now you're calling it creative direction. So I think that communicates right away that you are focusing on, it's not just copywriting, it's not just art directing, and it's not just the team that comes together and works together, but it's how do we evolve to that place where we can manage the department? Or am I guessing correctly? Is that what this is about?
You're right. And a big part of the name change really comes out of the culture, in the sense that when I was growing up and thinking about getting into this, nobody really knew what a creative director was. Those words weren't really part of the vernacular. But now things have changed, and there are a lot of people out there who want to do what a creative director does, but they don't associate that with advertising. And they don't want to be in advertising. They don't necessarily want to go work in an agency. Maybe they want to be a creative director for Beats. Maybe they want to be a creative director for Louis Vuitton. Maybe they want to be a creative director for any number of brands. But their vision, especially, a lot of 16, 17, 18-year-olds, is not to go sit in an advertising agency. That does not sound like what they want to do with their future. And so by changing it to creative direction, we're opening it wider. And it also reflects where we are in reality, which is that probably half of our grads go work at Apple or Adidas or Nike or Facebook or Google, and maybe half go work in agencies. And if truth be told, there's only really a pretty small handful of agencies that I'll let them work in, because as we all know, there's a lot of places that are not doing stuff that's so wonderful these days. And
how has that percentage changed, Gary? I mean, in the last 5 or 10 years, that breakdown, about half go on the client side and the half go to agencies. How has that changed?
It's changed a lot. When I first started as the department chair, I would say it was 90% went to agencies.
Hmm.
Because as you know, when there was a certain point in time where if you didn't get a job in an agency out of school and you said, you got a job internally with a client, that was considered bad. That was only the pharmaceutical firms had like internal agencies, because you had to know how to write all the little technical, scary copy that goes with all the things that could go wrong.
Yeah, I've done that.
Yeah, but it wasn't anybody's aspiration to work for a client back then. But now it's very different. I mean, Target changed that by doing all that great work in-house. Apple does a lot of the best work they do in-house now. You can go down the list. And so it's become a very different thing. And in some ways, it's they have more freedom.
Yeah, I went to work for an agency in Chicago. It was a pharmaceutical shop at the very cusp, the very beginning of when they were doing what we now call direct to consumer. And they were looking, and this is before my career has been mostly direct marketing and direct response. But at that time, I wasn't quite a senior, and I hadn't quite decided, did I want to go into direct marketing or I want to stick with branding? So I guess I called myself a branding copywriter. Yeah. And they were looking for people who had experience in building brands. Exactly. So working with physicians who were uncomfortable with anything that didn't say safe and efficacious was scary. But at any point, now, and Henry and I occasionally do creative reviews where we'll look at a campaign and we'll play Siskel and Ebert. And we have done occasionally brought in some pharmaceutical advertising, TV spots. They're actually pretty good.
Oh yeah.
So it has evolved a lot.
It's evolved a lot.
10, 20 years.
It's evolved a lot. And I think the clients are aware of the fact that they've got to do more to do something better, to be more relevant, to be more current. And they can't do what they used to do. But so, yeah, that's why we've changed it. And we also, we're attracting a wider range of students as well. It's opening up the types of students we're getting, and we get really interesting submissions. I changed the whole thing of what they have to submit. They don't have to submit ad campaigns to get in or anything like that. They can if they want to, but they can submit all kinds of different things that I give them, social media postings. There's a whole big range, because really I'm just trying to determine whether they can think and whether they want to execute. And we can deal with the particulars of what that's going to be. But if you can think and you can execute, I mean, a lot of these kids making memes and making videos in high school, they're doing basically what we do. They just don't know it.
Right. We're called the Brief Brothers because we like to talk about creative briefs. I teach workshops in brief writing, and Henry's done that himself. And Henry has written briefs. We did, not too long ago, we did about 4 episodes where we wrote a brief right on the show. Yeah, it was pretty fun. Henry did a really good job. You're working mostly with the executors, the artists, the writers, the graphic designers. Where does strategy and briefing and brief writing play a role, or does it not with your students?
Well, yeah, it does, in the sense that when we assign somebody a product to work on, the first step is they have to come back and do a little presentation about what the product or service is about, who uses it, why they use it, what the competition does, where does this fit within the culture, how can we make this product fit within the culture in a way that it's going to be right for the people we're trying to appeal to. So we try to get them to think strategically right off the bat. In that sense, they don't write formal briefs, but they write up manifestos for the brand that kind of describe what it is they're going to do, then execute.
Interesting. Okay, so it's basically like a brief-like object.
It's a brief-like object.
Yeah.
It's a brief-like object. Yeah, and we also structure assignments in a way to where many of them we will give them the brief, and then they have to execute off that. So it just depends on the particular class. And, we're always adding new classes because the business has changed so much. When I started in this position about 10 years ago, and I had to present to the ArtCenter board as part of the interviewing process, or whatever you want to call it, one of the questions they asked was what is your 5-year plan? And I told them the 5-year plan was to make a new plan every year. And that's what it's been, because as you know, in our business, nothing lasts for 5 years.
Yeah.
And the skills
And a
they
business
need
that
now
Yeah, we're
are so
obsessed with the
different.
new and shiny. Henry and I talk about that all the time.
Yeah, and the skills they need, the skills they need change. I mean, with social media and everything else, all of our students now know how to do motion graphics and can build motion graphics on their own. They can all shoot stuff on their own. So if they have an idea on a Friday that they want to show the client on Monday, they can go out and shoot something and edit it and put the motion graphics on it and put it together to show just as a rough thing of what their idea is. So, we've tried to build all the skills in that they're going to need as they go into their career.
I don't
So
know
you're
if,
training them. You're training them really well to work on weekends.
Sadly enough, yes. Yes. Although I know that's become out of fashion now, but it's
Yeah.
still the reality.
So do you show them ever an example of a really bad brief so they know how to deal with it? Because that's what they're going to encounter for the most part in their careers.
That's a good point. We don't do that. Maybe you should give us a really bad brief. We should do a little assignment or something.
the
I've got a few. I've
target
got more than a
audience,
few.
the target audience will say millennials,
Yeah.
and that'll be the
Or
only
Gen
word.
X. Or Gen X.
Or Gen Z now, right?
Gen Z, right.
It won't give any description beyond that. It'll just be that.
And the single-minded proposition will be a paragraph.
There won't be any budget attached to it, so it'll just be like, go out and shoot, Star Wars. So yeah, that's.
I actually
the one thing we do off that. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Gary.
I would say the one thing we do off that sometimes as an exercise is we'll hand them a 5 or 6 page single space type document and say, here's the brief.
Oof.
And everybody laughs. And we're like, you're gonna get these, these, and you're gonna have to find that one sentence in there or that series of 4 words that really is the heart of it and scrape away all the rest.
Yeah.
That's a great exercise. Before the pandemic, I used to do a lot of in-person training, and we had more time. Now everything is done virtually, so we are more compressed for time. But one of the things I did regularly was finding a bad brief is easy. Finding a really good brief is hard. And I don't mean a good template. I mean an actually completed brief. They're basically legacy briefs that are 15, 20 years old, because they're proprietary documents, and getting your hands on one is hard, which is why the exercise that we did with Henry gave me a brand new brief that I'd like to use. But I do have a brief that I like to use that it fits in a page, but it's just awful. It looks like it was written by someone who's never written a brief before, and it was a first draft. But I hand it out to the marketers, because those are the ones who take my training. I say, okay, tell me what you think about this brief. And the first thing that they say is, gee, this looks like one of our briefs. It's like, okay, well, now let's tear it apart. And that becomes a module in my training. Let's tear it apart and figure out, why is it bad?
That's great.
Where did it go wrong? Yeah.
That's so neat.
So I would strongly advise you to prep your students for the reality they're going to face by, pummeling them with a couple of bad briefs.
Yeah, it's such good advice, because, as we all know, you can't be dependent on that. You've got to be able to take what we would consider to be a bad brief and find a way to make that work,
Because creatives are expected to hit home runs, whether we get nothing, whether we get 20 pages, or we get a sticky note. We're expected to hit a home run every time.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think getting a good, who was it that we talked to? Was it Cameron Day that talked about,
He writes a mantra.
but we talked with somebody about like just ripping the brief, like basically writing their own brief. Like they get the
Yeah.
brief and they write their own brief because they're
There's
just
Cameron.
they're so accustomed to getting these poor briefs that they so all of this is to kind of get to the point that I think some of the schools that I've been associated with, one of them in particular has a class called Thinking Strategically. Now it's not for strategists, it's for art
Right.
directors and copywriters, but the idea is to get them an introduction to strategy so that they know what to look for in the brief. And so also they can push back when a brief is bad and say, hey, this target audience doesn't really, so that, and also to have some empathy. Another, I think, valuable thing about that is I don't think that everybody that enters as a creative necessarily ends up as a creative. Like sometimes I've seen people go from creative to strategy, and it's
Sure.
good to kind of have those skills on both sides, right? Because when you can really
Absolutely.
do both, then something unlocks there for an agency, that you have a really creative minded strategist or a really strategy oriented creative. So
I
Howard's,
totally agree.
yeah, Howard's advice is to show bad briefs, and my advice is also to to have like a module or something where to start thinking like a strategist, just so that they can deconstruct these briefs. And
Yeah, and the other valuable thing about what you're saying, and we used to do that at my agency, and we've done it at other agencies, people who, once we got into a creative pitch, and let's say it was down to the finals, and so you're down to maybe 3 or 4 agencies you're competing with, and we would often get placed in the category of, oh, that they're the creative award-winning agency. Yeah, we're going to put them on the list, and then we're going to put the serious agencies on the list. The either the consultant or the day-to-day client person wants to create a menu for their boss, and so they're going to have these different flavors on the menu. And we knew that in many cases we were being used to play that role, so they could go into to the boss and say, yeah, these guys are creative and they do all this award-winning stuff, but we're probably not going to really pick them, but we want you to see what they're about. And so we knew that, and we had a policy in terms of what we did in creative meetings, which is we never talked about creative. We always talked about business, and we always talked about strategy. And our belief was that we wouldn't be here if they didn't already know we were doing great creative. That's why they invited us. But when they walk in this room, we're not going to be talking about work that's so funny, and we're not going to be talking about awards, and we're not going to be talking about any of that. We're going to be talking about the business reasons behind everything we did and how it worked and why we did what we did. And I tell our students that all the time. I'm like, you've got to position yourself as somebody who the client trusts as an advisor or an objective consultant working on their business. You can't just be, the funny guy or the great designer.
quick question. So it wouldn't be a Brief Brothers episode if we didn't mention 2 names. The names are Paul Feldwick and Byron Sharp. So Paul Feldwick talks about the entertainment model of advertising, right? Like brands get famous when they do work that gets your attention, is entertaining. And Byron Sharp talks about it like from a more like academic approach about creating mental availability. And I think that they go hand in hand. I think that the way you create mental availability in most cases with brands is by being entertaining, by you make a brand famous by making the brand. Does any of those teachings like formally work their way into your program, or is it's just because what I'm seeing is that there's kind of the way we've always done things in this industry, and then there's kind of this new way of thinking. If you read Paul Feldwick's book, the truth is there've been probably half a dozen different models of how advertising works with consumers over the years, and as best as I can guess, he's gotten the closest to really describing how advertising works and kind of giving the more creative interpretation of what Byron Sharp is talking about when he talks about mental availability.
I've not read those books, but I'd like to after
Yeah.
what you're saying.
Well, then certainly I recommend them.
Yeah.
How Brands Grow by Byron Sharp. I think it's like 10, 12 years old. On the client side, it created a revolution, or it's in the process of creating a revolution.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
Paul Feldwick has a couple of books. It's
Two books.
Why Does the Peddler Sing?
And the first one is the Anatomy of Humbug. Yeah, which is the book where he describes, I think he does a great job in a very short book of describing the history of advertising philosophies. You know, how do we sell?
Yeah.
And I, in my book on the single-minded proposition, I devoted an entire chapter to his book, even though, and he's a believer in the creative brief. He's not a big believer in the single-minded proposition. And so I still devoted a chapter to him because it was a counterfactual, because I wanted my readers to understand that perspective. But yeah, I'm finding a lot of the people who attend my workshops are stuck on what I would call, and I think Henry would agree, old school thinking about their brands. They're looking for that point of differentiation, where none exist. They're just never going to find. And I do a lot of workshops for people, for industries in the financial industry, banking, insurance, parity products. What distinguishes one from another is not a benefit, but a brand. They're the power of their brand.
Absolutely. And that's, we get into that in different ways, but one of the classes that we teach is about how do you do work that becomes part of the culture. And Erwin Fabrizio teaches that. He worked at Wyden. He's at Anomaly now, and he's done a lot of great Nike work and other stuff. And he's got this whole class built around the idea of, it's not just about doing good work or interesting work. It's about finding a way to tap into the culture, tap into the mentality of the people that you're trying to reach in a bigger way. And certainly some brands have figured out how to do that. And, obviously, as we all know, the mileage is amazing that you get out of that.
I want to give you a chance to blow your horn again about the ArtCenter, where you shared with Henry and me before we started that the ArtCenter was highly ranked on a very prestigious list, and I want you to share that with us. Tell us more about what organization ranked the ArtCenter as high as it did, and tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was the One Club in New York, and the One Club is a creative club for mostly professional stuff, but there's a student side of it as well. And they rank all the schools in the world now. They never used to do that, 15, 20 years ago, but now they rank all the schools in the world because they have student award competitions in different categories. And so we've been in the top 5 for the last 4 or 5 years, but we've never been number 1. And this year we finally were able to be number 1, which was great tribute to our students, because we're not nearly as big as some of the schools that compete. So we don't have, we don't have 1,000 entries. And we also won across a wide range of categories. And it was us combined with our graphic design students in the graphics department that won in some of the graphic categories. We won the most in advertising. So the combined totality of the school was, we ended up number 1 this year, which was
that's great. Awesome.
Yeah, it was.
How many schools are in the running for their list? Offhand?
There's probably over 100.
Wow.
Believe it or not. I mean, there's the ones you would have heard of, like SCAD or Pratt or Parsons or School of Visual Arts or BYU. There's those, and then there's a whole bunch that you wouldn't have heard of probably globally. Some of them are very, very fine schools, actually. I think the school that came in number 2 maybe was in Antwerp or somewhere, not number 2 total, but in advertising. So there's some very good stuff being done, which is, again, it's very different than 5 or 10 years ago, but there's some very good teaching and some good stuff being done across the globe.
So we didn't at all at the beginning talk about what was your career trajectory like? You mentioned that you're an alumnus of the institution you're at now, but between then and now, what was your career trajectory, and how did you arrive to where you are now?
Okay. Um, yeah, I went to UT, as I mentioned, and then studied architecture.
University of Texas?
University of Texas,
Texas, Austin.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm wearing the public library T-shirt here, so
There we go.
we're promoting Austin, my new hometown,
Yes, that's right.
my adopted hometown.
I had a great time there. I loved it. I started off as an architecture major, did that for about 2.5 years, then switched to journalism and wasn't really sold on that, and realized it was kind of the combination of visual and verbal stuff that I liked. I didn't really want to give up one for the other. And I just happened to take an elective in advertising by a guy named Leonard Rubin, who taught there. And I thought, oh, this is kind of what I want to do, come up with ideas. And I was always like the guy in school that wrote the funny skits and the roasts of the teachers and stuff like that. So I could do the writing and the art direction stuff. And I thought that's what I want to do. And of course, I graduated before I had a chance to pursue that at all. And then I met with Stan Richards in Dallas, who looked at my book, and I thought he was going to hire me, but instead he said, no, you need to go back to school. And he mentioned ArtCenter.
Dan Richards, famously of the Richards Group.
Of the Richards
Yep.
Group.
Yep.
And so he suggested I go to ArtCenter. And then I had done a lot of research in award show books and knew I wanted to work at DDB in New York, Doyle Dane, when I got out. And I called and managed to get the creative personnel manager there on the phone and said, I want to be working there in a couple of years from now. Where should I go to school? And he goes, oh, that's nobody's ever asked me that before. Let me get back to you. I'm going to talk to some creative directors and I'll call you back. I was thinking he wouldn't call me back, but he did. And he said, ArtCenter College of Design, you should go there. That's the best place.
Wow.
And so I applied and I went there and got out and came back and actually got hired at DDB out of school, and had a really good, Bill Bernbach was still there. Actually, he died while I was there, but worked for Roy Grace and got off to a fast start, produced a bunch of work, and then got hired by Jay Chiat to go to Chiat Day, be the creative director of Chiat Day New York, which was very small and just starting. And that was a good opportunity because it felt like my first year there was one continuous new business pitch. I don't think we ever stopped. And so I got that trial by fire doing that, and won a lot of awards at DDB and at Chiat. And then myself and a partner who I'd met at DDB, an account guy, decided we should start an agency, and said, let's do it. And so, we didn't wait. And that's why I tell all my students, do it while you're young and you can still fit all your possessions in your car. That's a good time to start a business before you have too many obligations.
Exactly. Before you have kids and are, have those that mortgage and things like that. I agree. I found myself at a crossroads in my career in 2003, where we were either going to start an agency, or we were, me and two colleagues that we had just been at an agency that just closed its doors. And so we were trying to either get hired as a team, because we work in multicultural, and, we had account side, we had strategy, and we had creative, the three of us. Or we were going to start an agency, and we were looking for investors to help us out with starting the agency, and it fell through. And fortunately for us, the three of us were hired by Hill Holiday in Boston. They had an office down here in South Florida in Fort Lauderdale, and we established a little boutique Hispanic marketing practice for them. It was very fruitful. But yeah, even at that moment I already had kids, and it was gonna be a tough transition.
Oh yeah. I didn't have kids then, and I think I was 31 maybe when we started. And we started out of my apartment in New York, and my partner was the account guy. His apartment was a couple blocks away, so he was working in his apartment with a couple people. I was working in my apartment. We used to have our meetings in Central Park, and we'd go work in Central Park with folding chairs. And we had like a little cup of quarters we'd use to go to the payphone to make calls. So we had to make calls. And then finally we got an office in a loft downtown. And anyway, we had the agency for 10 years. We won a lot of good businesses. We had El Al Airlines, and we got an airline account pretty early on in the game, which was good. We had Everlast Activewear. We had Macallan Scotch, single malt Scotch.
Nice.
So we built it up pretty big, and we had Us Magazine, part of Rolling Stone, and Jan Winter was one of our clients. So we got a lot of attention, built it up pretty big, and then we got purchased by Interpublic and Lowe Group, and merged
Nice.
into Lowe. And then I ended up becoming chairman of Lowe, and all of the North American parts of Lowe. And I did that for another 10 years. So I think we've just covered about 25, 30 years, which is,
Wow.
which is
Yeah,
enough.
that's great.
And
It's a great, it's a great,
It's a great story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you also take great pride, Gary, in touting the successes and the career successes of your students and alumni. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
yeah, I mean, to me, that's the benchmark. We can talk about theory all we want. We can talk about all the things we're teaching all we want, but unless you've got people who are leaving all the time and proving it, and I don't mean just the occasional superstar who would have been good no matter where he or she was, but if you've got a certain consistency. And so almost all of our students get jobs right out of school, which is good. And last year, actually a couple months ago, I think I was mentioning in my note to you, I was at my house. I got a text late at night from one of my students who graduated about 4 or 5 years ago, who works at Apple. He sent me a text from Cannes saying that they had just won 5 golds and the Grand Prix for a film they did for Apple, because he works at Apple.
Was that the film with the detectives?
Is the film with the people who quit. They,
Oh, yes. That was
Yeah.
that was another big one. Howard and I reviewed the one with the detectives. I don't know if you've seen that one.
Yeah, yeah,
The rack focus feature on the new phone, on new iPhone. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that's the kind of thing. It's funny. I was sitting there in the kitchen. I showed my wife the text from Esteban Cardona Jimenez is his name. I showed her the text from Esteban, and she looked at it and she goes, "That's why you do this, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, that's why I do this."
Yep.
That
I
makes
get that
it
feeling.
all worth it. That makes it
Mhm.
all worth it. So anyway, I think we establish the kind of relationship with our students that goes long beyond when they're there. I get texts and calls all the time. "Hey, I got a job offer. Can I talk to you about it? And we're thinking about changing jobs, this and then the other. I got this. What do you think of this? What do you think of that?" And we tell them when they're there, you're creating a long-term relationship. This is a lifetime relationship. You're going to graduate, but we're still going to be here. And so it's a different kind of feeling. Of course, there's the flip side of that. We have 8 terms to graduate. And one of my students a few years ago, when he was in 7th term, he came to me, he said, I just have one question. He goes, at orientation on day 1, you said there was going to be tough love. And I was just wondering when the love starts.
That's great.
And
I love it.
I said, well, when you walk in for your first day of work at Wieden & Kennedy or
There you
Apple
go.
or Google or somewhere, you're going to feel the love. That's when you're going to feel the love.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so anyway, that's for all of us who teach anywhere, I'm sure, but for all of us who teach certainly in our department, it's that commitment to the long-term success of our students that motivates us.
Yeah. Gary Goldsmith, Department Chair of Creative Direction at ArtCenter College of Design in Pasadena. Thank you so much for joining Henry and me on the Brief Brothers.
Thank you. I enjoyed talking to you guys.
Thank you.
Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach, and together we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time, bye-bye.